So we're going to start today, even before introductions, before I tell you a little bit about myself, and we're just going to do a breathing exercise. And this can be something that we we'll probably do a couple throughout the morning, but it's something that at least will help me calm my central nervous system, because here I am standing in front of a bunch of people I don't know. And I've probably had too much coffee. And I think it will help all of us as people trickle in and as the people online come together as well. So why don't we just sit together, sit up in your chair, 2 feet on the floor. I like to call that kind of the ready pose. You can either have your hands on your lap or just resting. Sometimes people like to put them up to be receiving good energy. And if you feel like closing your eyes, that's something you can do. Some people like keeping their eyes open, or, one eye open, keep an eye on things. So however you're comfortable, that would be great. So just before you change anything, just notice your breath. So we're all breathing. We've all been breathing pretty consistently for however long we've been alive. And just notice how deep your breath is, how long your breath is, or short and shallow. And just sit here with that breath for a moment. And then maybe start to notice that since we've settled, maybe your breath has changed. Maybe it's a little slower, maybe a little deeper. Maybe you start to notice other changes that go along with that deeper breath, the calmer breath. Maybe your heart starts to settle if you've kind of been running around this building. Maybe your shoulders start to relax a bit. Maybe your thoughts are getting in the way and you start to think about your to-do list for the day or other sessions you want to attend. So as you take your breaths, acknowledge where your mind is. Mine is a little bit of a Curious George brain, so it bounces around a little bit. Just acknowledge without any judgment where your thoughts are. And then gently bring your attention back to your breath. Breathing in and out. And now we're going to try and actually deepen our breath. So we've noticed our breath. We've observed our breath for the last minute or so. And now we're going to try and deepen our breath. So if you feel comfortable placing one hand on your chest and the other one on your belly, see if you can, as you bring in that air, that breath, bring it as deep into your hand that's on your belly so that it's no longer a shallow breath in your chest and it's a deeper breath in your diaphragm or your belly. And now notice what impact that might have. How does it change the way you're holding your body, the way you're experiencing the room? Maybe even those thoughts slow down a bit. So for the next 30 seconds or so, we'll just sit here. I won't talk, I promise. And you can just breathe. All right. Quick 30 seconds, right? So I welcome you to just bring your attention back to the room. You might want to move around a little bit. I see some yawns. It's amazing what just a couple of minutes will do to your body. I'm Emily Mazzulla, as Jean mentioned. I'm the Chief Trauma and Resilience Psychologist for SWIM. I'm also the director of the Center for Psychological Services, which is the training clinic at Marquette for those PhD students in the clinical psych program who are learning to be therapists. And my work is historically been in trauma and resilience. So I am also a cross-cultural psychologist. My work has been for the past decade with resettled refugees from really all over the world. I just moved back to Wisconsin. I was born and raised in Wisconsin, had an 18-year hiatus and then came back. But I moved from Burlington, Vermont. And Burlington is what we call a rural resettlement area. And so we have over 14% in a very short amount of time. 14% of our small 50,000 person town, city, are resettled refugees. And so we, as a city and as sort of a group of professionals, had to pretty quickly and also very intentionally look at the role of trauma, the role of resilience, and also systems and change that might have to happen within systems in order to grow with our changing demographic. And so my work, I always say trauma and resilience because I think of those as two sides of the same coin. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I think everybody has either a Scaling Wellness in Milwaukee piece of paper or pad, or your SDC pad. Is that true? And a pen? Does everybody have all of those things? Okay. So if you could, for a moment, before we get into definitions, if you could write down maybe 5 things, activities, people, whatever, what helps you cope? So just take a moment to think about what helps you cope. You can just maybe put your pen down. Let me see your eyes when you feel like you're all ready. I see your eyes. So I see most people are ready. Does anybody feel comfortable telling the group what you wrote down or one of the things you wrote down, please?
One thing,
Maybe say your name too.
oh, Talaba Muhammad. I enjoy walking in the park.
Anything else?
Oh yeah, I can name them all if
Okay,
you like.
please.
Exercising, meditation, journaling, reading, and praying.
Love that. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? I just got my heart rate down and here I am, bringing it back up.
My love of life, my love for people, my faith, and my goals and my resistance to negatives.
Excellent. Thank you. Can you tell me your name?
Oh, Ms. Rose.
Ms. Rose. Thank you. Anybody else?
Oh, hi.
All right. Roller skating, slot machines, window shopping, bike riding, and eating.
Excellent. I love it. Our next community meeting is at Potawatomi. So I'll meet you there.
Reading, shopping, and I play this game on my phone.
What kind of game is it? If you don't mind.
It's a bubble game.
Okay, so maybe distraction. Is there a little distraction in that? Yeah, popping bubbles. All right, I'd call that distraction. Anybody else? Okay.
My name is Keisha. For me, it's journaling, meditation, music, reading, and affirmations.
This is so great. Okay, anybody else? All right.
Hi, my name is Kathy. What helps me cope is laughter, a smile. It's a lot of things that goes on in this world today, and just being able to smile and laugh really can make, can go a long way. Music and the ability to know how to utilize resources to get the help. There's a lot of resources out here to help people, but if you don't know how to be resourceful and how to utilize those resources, then you might not, can get the help that is available out here. So just knowing that I, know how to be resourceful, it helps me cope.
That's excellent. Thank you all for participating and also sharing for those of you who did. So let's back up a second. Why do we need to cope? What's the purpose of coping? Life is tough. You can just reduce stress. Keep moving forward with your life. Get things done. So stress doesn't get in the way, maybe. Okay. Anything else? To learn to be with yourself. I like that. So when we think about trauma, there are many definitions of trauma. Trauma can be described as an event or a situation or a series of events that interrupts our ability to cope. What do people think about that definition? Yeah. And coping or resilience is our ability to cope with challenges, stressors, even a trauma. So that's why I said I really think about trauma and resilience, and I describe myself as a trauma and resilience psychologist because I do see them as hand in hand. So when we think about, there are many models of resilience, but when we think about resilience, it's very personal. So again, let's back up to trauma, and we're going to get to collective trauma like COVID. But what makes one situation traumatic or even stressful, if we don't want to use the word trauma? What makes one situation stressful for one person might not be traumatic or stressful for another person. A great example might be a car accident, right? So two people in a car, or even two cars, and one walks away and is like, yikes, that was rough. They may need some time. They have to deal with the aftermath, call the police, get the car fixed, call the insurance, etc. But for the most part, they're able to go on with their lives. The other person, same car accident, maybe even same, no physical problems, thankfully, but it was traumatic. There might be nightmares. There might be fear of getting back in the car. There might be intrusive thinking during the day. Maybe they start to avoid going places in the car and they stay home a little bit more. And that might be because their perception of the same event was a traumatic one. So what, why? What are these factors that go into why one person walks away and, certainly not delusional, like that wasn't a bad thing, but able to move forward with their lives and kind of do what needs to be done in order to move past the event. And another is really struggling and maybe even changes the course of their life. And so, there's not one answer to that. Do people have ideas about what are some of the factors that might be contributing to these two divergent pathways? Yeah, here, let me give you the mic. And please tell me closer.
Hi, my name is Shirita Lane. I would say past trauma, which could surface as triggers and keep a person stuck in a particular space.
So there's a cumulative nature to trauma, that these things don't happen in a bubble, right? Okay. Anybody else? Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got people on the, oh, I'm sorry.
I would say people who are in denial that they're not dealing with trauma, or that type of stuff doesn't affect them in that way, which I see a lot. Just people in denial that they've experienced something traumatic, or they're carrying that trauma along their life. Got family members who, from growing up, these are now they're 50, 60 years old, they're still holding on from stuff from that happened to them in their childhood, and they don't want to deal with it. I think our generation deals with seeking therapy and coming to terms with things a little bit better than maybe the older generation does.
Thank you. So the perspective shift, maybe generationally, but also in terms of maybe processing what has been going on as it goes on or as it's experienced. And that might help maybe mitigate or protect against the impact or a full impact of another trauma. Okay. Excuse me, do you mind if I just, sorry.
Ms. Rose, one thing I always say, to thine own self be true. When you know yourself and you get education and be honest with yourself, you can handle anything.
Okay, thank you. So resilience recently has gotten a bad rap, and for good reason. And sometimes when academics get involved, what we end up doing is kind of changing terms, but not kind of coming up with the plan. So I'll tell you what has been going on in the resilience literature right now. The resilience world is saying, well, wait a second. Why are we placing bolstering resilience or bolstering coping skills and getting survivors of trauma or people to be more resilient? Why aren't we focusing on the environments that are, happening and that might be perpetuating either traumas or this need for robust resilience, right? So schools, hospitals, systems, why aren't we focusing there? And I agree. I think it's absolutely the case that we need to continue to, identify systems that might be perpetuating trauma, systems that might be, working for some and working against others. I think we've been talking about that in the past couple of days, and I completely agree that systems need to be addressed and, policies need to be changed, et cetera. I also believe that resilience is important, and whatever we call it, I really don't even care. It's about identifying for people while things are changing, while we're working to change and beyond, how do we teach resilience? How do we build resilience from a young age and protect against things that are perpetuated unnecessarily, right? Through systems and policies. So how can we do this in parallel? Because certainly system change takes a long time. right? And life happens, as I think somebody said. Life happens, right? So this is a model of resilience that I wanted to introduce. And what I'd encourage you to do is look at your list and let's go through these different categories of resilience. The idea here is that there's not one recipe for resilience. It's very individualized. So what works for one person might totally work against another person. For example, if you are really, social and you love being around people, perhaps talking with loved ones or being in a social setting is actually helping you cope with stress. Well, if you're an introvert and you really like to recharge your batteries at home by yourself, that's not going to be helpful for you. So this is very personalized. And as I would imagine, if we had time to go through everybody's formula that you made up about what helps you cope, we're going to see that everybody's got their own kind of recipe here. So just to go over what some of these things are, we've got, this is basic pH, and it was developed by an Israeli professor who was looking at chronic trauma. In Israel, there's lots of war, decades of war, and resilience is something that their society, their government has tried to build, knowing that, there's no end in sight, unfortunately. So the B in basic is belief. I think people talked about spirituality, talked about, meditating, maybe writing to, your higher God, whomever. So for people who might be very religiously inclined, going to church, going to synagogue, going to the mosque might be very helpful for helping cope. As somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about the central nervous system, I think what's really effective about that is it's a lot of still time too. Like you're sitting and you're reflecting and you're calm, you're breathing, you're calm. So there's some additive parts to this as well. Just like trauma is cumulative, resilience is cumulative too. So belief system, affect is, the emotional piece. So potentially laughing, we heard about, doing things that bring joy, maybe singing, dancing, things that kind of change your affect, bring in positive activities. Social, we talked a little bit about that. If your list has some gathering type activities, calling somebody on the phone, writing, a letter, an email or text, group chats, whatever it might be, but making that connection. I just, right before I started the presentation, one of my friends from graduate school who's been helping me with a situation that my son is in, she called and she knows that it's just a nice connection to just, okay, today's the day, he's got an interview today and we got to get through that. So that social connection just does a lot for me. Imagination. So it might be thinking about what could be, planning for the future. It might tap into artistic talents, right? So if you are an artist, a singer, a painter, whatever it might be, that some imaginative pieces can be very restorative for people. And again, this is, as you can see, it's very personal and individualized. Cognition, I'm a little guilty of this as well. I like to kind of think through. If I'm thinking, I feel like I'm problem solving and I'm going to think about it all the different ways. Sometimes that's really helpful because I'm able to say, okay, it feels very active for me to think about, something and how I can maybe put this into perspective. I heard somebody say that earlier too, put things into perspective. And then physical, we heard a lot of physical, bike riding, running, going for walks, other physical activities, you name it. So these are broad categories. And if you just take a moment and look at what you've put on your sheet, did anybody hit all of these categories? What about, 4? 4 or 5? Okay. Did anybody hit only 1? I said that with some judgment. 1? Okay. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you are really personalizing your way of managing stress, right? Now, what's beautiful about resilience is it can be built, it can be taught, it can grow over time. I think schools right now with their social and emotional curriculums are building resilience, building coping. And so if you think back to, and we're going to come back to COVID because that's what we're talking about here, the collective trauma of COVID. But when you think about when there has been a big stressor in your life, and maybe COVID is one that we can all sort of talk about together, were there any of these things or items of resilience, coping skills that you heard other people say that you thought, oh yeah, I haven't done that in a while? That does help me. I didn't hear anybody say bubble bath, but that's on my list. So just in case you haven't taken one of those in a while. Anybody hear anything that you're like, okay, I've wanted to try that. In another group, somebody talked about knitting being very, something with their hands. So it was a little bit physical and it was very calming, and there's a rhythm to knitting. And a lot of people feel like bringing rhythm back into healing practices are very effective for trauma. It kind of brings you back to why people rock, why people dance, why people, like music, because there's a rhythm to it that's very soothing. So knitting. Yeah. Say that.
Sewing.
Sewing.
Sewing can be very resilient tool. I know I experienced severe trauma years ago, and I always had an interest in sewing, and I just started sewing like crazy. I was making stuff, and it didn't matter whether I needed it or not. I was just sewing.
What do you think it was about sewing that connected you to it? So
It takes your mind off. If your mind is you're in the middle of a crisis, it's sorts of you focusing on what you're trying. It's creative, so then it kind of forces you to undergo a creation process, and so you kind of push whatever it is that it's giving you something to cope with. So you kind of it teaches you to focus and cope with doing something else. You're creating something, you're making something.
what I like about what you're saying is resilience and coping strategies don't solve the problem, right? It doesn't take the stressor away. It helps you manage your reaction to the stressor, right? And so I think I heard, I can't remember your name, but I did hear you say you've got like a bubble bursting game and there's some distraction there. So psychologists will say, let's make sure we're not avoiding, we don't want to avoid, but that's a fine line, right? So at some point we're going to talk about the trauma or we're going to talk about the stressor, but not all day, every day. That's not helping anybody. So distraction and, using your artistic talents or focusing your mind on something that's adaptive, that's healthy, that's, working for you, keeps your body calm, keeps your mind calm, and you're getting through the day. And sometimes that's the most important part, right? And then once you get through one day, it's easier to get through the next, right? And I think what you were saying in the back there was, when we talked about cumulative trauma being cumulative, same thing, right? If you're not, working through whatever is going on, then it's going to add up. So I'm spending way too much time on this, you guys, but I think it's important. There was something else I wanted to say about this. I can't remember. Oh, I always think of this as like a personality test a little bit, right? Like, how you've got, you're an extrovert, you're an introvert, you're whatever. This is sort of one of those things. You can kind of see, all right, I like the physical, I certainly like the cognitive, I like the social, and maybe I'm going to start bringing in some of the spiritual a little bit more, or some of the imaginative piece a little bit more. That might be helpful for me. Okay. All right. Looking at the time here. Oops. Okay. Let's do another mindfulness activity. Is that okay with people? Okay. So same stance. And actually, I'm going to put this beautiful image because that looks awesome. So if you want to sit back in that same stance, if you're at home, you could even lie down, although if you're like me, that would be the end of it. I'd be sleeping. So 2 feet on the ground, hands down. Again, closing your eyes if you feel like that's something you want to do. It is certainly not necessary. One eye open if you want to keep an eye on things. And what we're going to do is just, again, notice your breath. So in through your nose and out through your nose, or in through your nose and out through your mouth. And just let your body sink into your chair. Feel the ground underneath your feet. And now in your next inhale, bring your attention to your head, your forehead. And I want you to put as much tension in there as you can. So furrow your brow, kind of squeeze, 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 get as much tension there as you can. Squeeze for another 2 seconds and then release. Let all that tension go from your forehead. Move that same tense, holding that tension into your cheeks and jaw, into your neck. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Bring all of that tension into your jaw, into your cheeks. Another 2 seconds. And then release. Now bring your attention and your tension into your shoulders, your upper chest, your neck. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Another 2 seconds, and then release. Keeping an eye on your breathing. Try not to hold your breath here. It sometimes is our tendency to hold our breath. And your next inhale, bring your focus and your attention to your belly, to your lower back, your seat. And squeeze, squeeze, squeeze really hard. 2 more seconds and then release. And same with your forearms, your fists, your hands. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Get all that tension. Another 2 seconds and release. Moving down into your thighs, your calves. Squeeze, bring all that tension into your calves and your thighs, your knees. Squeeze. I don't know if we can squeeze our knees, but, and then release. And now your feet, your toes, squeeze. Clench, tighten. Another 2 seconds and release. Now take a moment while you're still in this relaxed position to notice how your body feels. Sometimes bringing attention and tension into your body with effort allows us to fully release. I notice my jaw and neck, and I kind of put my head forward. So now just relax your whole body, all your muscles. Take a few deep breaths here without me talking. And then I invite you to open your eyes, bring your attention back to the room. So that was called a progressive muscle relaxation. It was kind of a quick one, but you can do those, in very minute progression down the body or up the body, seated, lying down. And again, that's a way to really fully release and also just come into your body. Oftentimes we're not always aware of where the tension is. Again, my jaw is where I hold all of my tension, and I don't even notice that I'm clenching, and then I release and oh yeah, I was clenching. So let's move back to COVID. It's been almost 2 years, which is crazy. Think about where you were maybe 2 years ago in the fall of 2019. And then think about how quickly our society, our world shifted when COVID happened, and we had to change our way of living, our way of socializing, our way of praying, our way of doing everything, educating our kids. And I think we can all agree that that was stressful at the very least, right? Oh, Miss Rose says no, wasn't stressful. And it is all about perspective. I appreciate that. Some people, and of course we all had different details of COVID, right? It's not the same accident, right? Where the impact was the same, the damage was the same, but different outcomes. Everybody had a different detail of what the coronavirus brought into their lives. Has anybody ever heard the term of collective traumatic event? Okay, seeing some nods. I'm sorry? Right, so an event, a traumatic event that impacts more than an individual, could be a family, that would be sort of a small collective event, a society. For us, I mean, this was the world, across the world, and it continues to be. So we can definitely say that this was or can be a collective traumatic event with some variability within that definition as to who experienced what and to what extent. What, again, trauma does is it disrupts our sense of safety and challenges our ability to cope. The transition period between we have this virus and now everybody's, home, kids are home, there's no PPE. I mean, I'm just thinking about this. I'm like remembering. That transition period was abrupt. It was short. If you think back to your personal details for that transition period, how much of your list, your coping list, were you utilizing? Or maybe the more appropriate question is, how much of that went to the wayside or like out the window? Were people utilizing, going to their coping strategies, their resilience strategies? Good, I'm seeing some nods. You guys are better than me. That's great. For whatever reason, sometimes when we are super stressed, or when there's a traumatic event or a collective traumatic event, it's almost as if we forget what works, right? Because what's happening in our bodies. We're flooded with, stress hormones. Everybody else is flooded with stress hormones. It's people panic, so to speak. But transitions in general can be really hard. That transition in particular, I think, was very challenging. And as we've now moved almost 2 years beyond that initial transition, there have been other transitions. People transitioned back into people transitioned to teaching their kids virtually. I have 3 little kids, so I'm going to talk about kids for a second. Then back into school, then maybe back at home when there was a positive case or whatever, right? There were lots of transitions, and for whatever reason, we kind of got better, and it became, I never liked this term, but what am I going to say? The new normal, right? And I think what's important about transitions is it's almost like when things are challenging and we feel like nothing's going to work, that's when going back to that basic pH, your personal recipe for resilience, for coping, is the most important. The other thing about transitions, and I think trauma in general, is something we call post-traumatic growth. Has anybody heard this term before? Okay. I'm going to just put these all up here. I don't think that's how I wanted to do it originally, but so sometimes it takes time and stability. So any evidence-based treatment, intervention, program for trauma or addressing trauma, does anybody know what the first necessary component, whether it's in the field of psychology, social work, education, what is necessary for treating, healing trauma, addressing trauma? I'm sorry. Say it again. Talking about it. Okay. 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 We're not there yet. Okay. Before all of those things, safety. What we've been doing today is reconnecting with a calm or a safety. You have all put your trust in me. Some of you have closed your eyes. All of you have your backs to the door. That's not very trauma informed of us, is it? Right? Safety is the very first component, and it needs to be established in order to move beyond or to whatever we want to say. I was just criticizing that myself, in order to heal, in order to address, in order to grow. And without that safety, and oftentimes with multi-generations of trauma, with multiple traumas, like you were saying, the cumulative aspect of trauma, that safety isn't ever established, right? So post-traumatic growth is, in a way, it happens when safety is established. In a way, it's a luxury, right? It is finding meaning. It's finding purpose. It's putting things into perspective. It's saying, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm almost glad that happened because, this is now my new path. I can share a story that's a very common story from the people that I've worked with from war trauma, torture. The program that I helped establish was called New England Survivors of Torture and Trauma. So I was never somebody people wanted to talk to at like a party. What do you do? But a very common story is, if the war didn't happen, then we wouldn't have moved to the United States, and my 6 children wouldn't be Americans and wouldn't have their American education and opportunities. Wow. That's resilience. That's a perspective shift. That's a paradigm shift. Wow. And I will never forget. It actually gives me chills right now. I'm a little cold, but I will never forget the first person who told me that. I was like, oh my gosh. I like went to my supervisor and was like, wait a second. Thank you. What do we do about that? Because that, but that's life, right? And so post-traumatic growth, that's sort of one story for post-traumatic growth. And I'm telling you, there's not one person who didn't have a version of that. And some of these stories are horrendous, as you are aware. But there is development, there's shifting, there's changing, which is what everybody said, a desire to change, a motivation to change, talking about it, right? And in order for that to happen, safety has to exist. So if we come back to COVID, has anybody, or would anybody like to share anything that would be maybe considered one of those 5 domains of post-traumatic growth? Are we there yet? I know Miss Rose is there. She's been there the whole time.
No, what bothered me is when you say that safety is a matter of whether it's conscious or subconscious. And if you have a faith, you can have a subconscious safety. So therefore you always have a safety.
Absolutely. Safety is subjective. Sometimes. I mean, there are things that need to be,
That's why, when you asked that question, once you recognize trauma, you don't have to worry about all the preliminaries. And that way you don't have to go through all the things that normal, yes, I'm not classified as normal, but normal people go through, because knowledge really brings out what's necessary to cope with everything in life.
And I think what you're talking about is post-traumatic growth, right? Growth from these experiences. Without being invalidating. And I obviously use humor, but what we talk about is heart-wrenching and inhumane 99% of the time, and horrible. So please don't misinterpret my my approach as not validating, because it's a long road. Thinking about COVID, has anybody learned anything either about their personal life, their professional life, that you wouldn't have learned if COVID didn't happen? The way you work, the way you interact. Yeah.
For myself, I've always been pretty busy working, teaching, and educating myself. Once COVID happened and we were shut down, I was stuck in the house. I was literally going crazy because I'm not the type of person that sits still. Yeah, I had a lot of things going on. So for me, I picked up new habits. Like I started bike riding, and I don't like riding bikes. I started walking. I enjoy walking, but I'd rather walk by the lake, but I couldn't do that. So I had to walk by a trail just to find some internal peace and balance myself. I started meditating, listening to meditation music at night while I was sleeping, calming music. I began to become more spiritual and processing. So processing for me was super huge. Processing reality versus fictional. Aliens are going to get us and we're going to turn into robots and all that. So that was super huge for me to transition through the whole experience of COVID during the heart of COVID. And now I feel like I'm in more of a space of new possibilities, new opportunities. We learned a lot from this experience. It made us all sit down and think. And now that we're in a thinking space, I feel like we're ready to build. And that's where I am.
Follow-up question. Is there anything that you added to your life that you are keeping?
That's a good question. Anything I added that I'm keeping? Meditation and solidarity, being okay with being by myself, so I could think, and again, balance, the importance of balancing work and life and my thoughts. I'm a thinker, so when I'm busy, I'm thinking. When I'm sleeping, I'm thinking. I'm dreaming of something, learning how to quiet the noise down in my own head. So that's something I learned during the process of meditating and becoming more spiritual. And that's something that I will continue to practice. Mhm.
Thank you for sharing. Anybody else want to share? Okay.
Sure. Still in East Landon. So I thought something was wrong with me because I was happy that the world was shut down. I think everybody at that point, everybody was at their breaking point. It was just so much going on. And I was just happy that the world was shut down so it brought people back to their families. It brought people, I'm an only child, so it didn't bother me being at home. I knew how to cope and be by myself. I was with my mom though. I did end up getting COVID, me and my mom. So, and it got a little scary at that point, and I was like, wow, what's really going on around here? But I enjoyed the time off. I got a lot done. I could think. Not upset, but I was a little disappointed that I couldn't, like a lot of people came with business ideas out of this. I wish I could have thought of something, brilliant for everyone or something. I don't know. So at that point, I thought something was wrong because I was happy. I had the spiritual in me. We still continued church virtually, but I felt like I was okay with it. I was, not okay that people were dying. There were people dying from it. Of course, my heart went out to them. And then it got a little scary, like I said, when me and my mom got it, but we made it through. Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah, the rest part of it, yes, for sure. Yeah, and yeah.
Same follow-up questions. Started doing when you were forced to do things.
I can't think of anything that I started that I wasn't doing prior. Yeah. Yeah.
So back in church.
Say that again, I'm sorry. We're back in person. Yes. Yeah. We're back in person. We started that back in the beginning of the year. Yeah. So it never stopped, because they were there at the building. We stopped going, just, not being around a lot of people. So we did take the precautions that we were supposed to take, but yeah.
I asked because I know that, like church, for example,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Oh, yeah. Oh. Oh, I didn't even the possibility. Sorry to ignore you people. Here, let me give you the mic so people can hear.
So someone asked, trauma is unfortunately becoming we need resources that can help the people learn to cope with trauma. So it's really not a question they had, but more so maybe looking for resources.
So this might be a good opportunity to talk about swim. And why don't I'm going to pause on that question. I'm just going to present the last slide and then we'll let Jean talk about swim for a moment. I'm probably way beyond time. Okay. So you guys all hit on these things, but essentially You know, these are some, we don't have to talk about these together, but thought questions for you, for, you know, your family, for your friends. How can we look at this in a growth, with a growth mindset, right? And the piece about values, what did your reaction say to you about the way that you were living and trying to, you know, keep up with the way that everybody else was living, when really you wanted some time with your mom or time home, you know? So these are some of those discussion questions that you guys can keep pondering. Of course, none of us have all the answers. And I think that's sort of part of the theme, that we all kind of deal with life and challenges and traumas in different ways. That being said, there are some wonderful resources that are in our community. And I think people did talk about that earlier today. So what SWIM is a collaborative, a consortium of organizations that are trauma facing, is what we like to say, in various ways. So some serve youth, like the comment we got from our virtual attendee. There are some that are specific to schools, some that are, you know, survivors of sexual assault. You know, trauma can, as we've talked about, can look very different and can be, you know, with you know, impact different people. So would you, Jean, like to say a little bit about the various resources? Okay. Thank you all so much. We can share my email, but I'm happy to, you know, talk to anybody afterwards, or feel free to email me. Thank you.
Tremendous resource in Dr. Emily Mazzulla, and we're blessed to have her. And I think that this is a representative of the same dialogue that we want to continue to have in our community with several organizations who are partners, who are still not our partners still as a member of SWIM, and that we want to get out to the overall community. This is the type of coursework and type of skill sets, a type of rethinking, right? Doing a growth process. How do we grow? We grow by, you know, opening ourselves up to learn different ways, how to cope with our different facets of trauma. And as an individual, as youth, as our families, our new communities and neighborhoods, there's some amazing groups, right? Milwaukee's known for having very strong infrastructure of nonprofits. We're looking to work with them individually, make them partners and members of SWIM. So if you're in your neighborhood and you're a part of one of those organizations, if you're a part of their executive teams, I invite you to come reach out to us. We will come out to you. We want to bring the skill sets, the resources, the elements that, you know, Dr. Mazzulla presented, and all our resources to bear in all our communities, because we want to, you know, increase the quality of life as a whole in our region and city of Milwaukee. My role also take it from a individual perspective to an organizational perspective. As individuals, we've suffered our traumas through this entire episode of COVID. But, you know, I'm going to age myself here a little bit. But you know, the fact is, through my lifetime and my career in banking, and now as an executive director, and I think most of you have witnessed this, our country has gone through several deep and game-changing events in the last 20-25 years. Okay, we go back to the attacks on the Twin Towers and how that changed how we, you know, saw how vulnerable we were at that point, but economically, how that changed the entire banking industry, right? Then we had 2008. That was another game changer. Economically, we had to restructure ourselves once again. And now we're going through the aftermath post-COVID, which again has been economically devastating to our entire community and country, correct? So with that, every time we go through these game-changing events, you know, our organizations, our corporate, you see and you feel and you realize, most of us who are working with an organization, institution, right, a corporate entity, they're all shifting. They're all changing the way they deliver their services, how they deal with their employees, how they're working to kind of come back to some semblance of the way it used to be. but I think we're all realizing that it's not going to be the way it used to be, right? And more we're being asked, how do we get through? How do we cope and get through as an organization? And even prior to COVID, most of our executive directors or leaders in our community organizations, they were already financially stretched. They were already strapped. They were already struggling. They were fighting for the same resources. They were looking for ways to stay open and stay functional, and how important those organizations are to our communities. We all realize that though they're providing the services that most big organizations or the state, the feds, or hospitals or other major partners don't want to do, but they do, right? And they're pivotal in part of helping support our families who are on the front line in our communities. And if we want to see the growth and the right trajectory, we need, as much as we want to bring support to individuals like yourselves through coursework like this, where the different facets to SWIM is that we want to bring resources, our network around those executive directors, the organizations who are doing really good work. We want to reinforce them. We want to support them and their growth post-COVID. We want to support them and their ability to kind of manage through the traumas, right? Manage through the changes and dramatic shifts, right? And I come as the executive director, being in the financial industry for 25 years, finishing my dissertation in the next couple of weeks as I defend my dissertation on the purpose of bringing to bear an accelerator model where we're giving the tools and resources to our community leaders, our executive directors, our community neighborhood organizations, the resources they need to cope, to get through this change and really kind of become a new version of them, where they're serving our community stronger and better. Because we are going to come out of this stronger and better, but we have to do it together, right? And we're committed to that. And given the opportunity through SWIM, it is to bring those resources together and create this support network that we can bring to bear to our city, our region, and hopefully with those efforts, we'll be able to bring up and increase the quality of life as a whole, right? And addressing poverty and all the other different issues that we have. So I'm excited about that opportunity, but I need you to help us. Spread the word. Let people know SWIM is here to support not only us, our corporate entities and our industries in your workplace, because that's what we do. We're doing those corporate trainings. Imagine having your departments, your entities that you work for, go through, you just got a taste of some of the training that we're going to be bringing to bear. But we're also bringing the entire resources to our network of nonprofit leaders and executives so that we can get our communities to grow with us as well. So we need your help to spread the word. My name is Manzanet, obviously Dr. Mazzulla. We're a part of an effort, a collective effort to improve the quality of life in Milwaukee and this region. And we're looking to perfect it here so that we can amplify it and continue to do it on a larger scale in the region and move from there. So we're excited. I'm glad you spent your hour with us. Those virtually, thank you for joining us over the last hour. Are there any other questions that we should be addressing from the virtual side? Okay, perfect. But thank you to those who joined us virtually. Thank you for spending your hour with us. Make sure you work up with the information. And yeah, if you have any questions, myself and Dr. Mazzulla will be here answering any additional questions afterwards. We're about 5 minutes over, but I wanted to make sure we reemphasize the entire spectrum of what SWIM does and what we're going to be doing moving forward into 2022 and beyond. Thank you all, everyone, for joining us in the summit and today's session. Thank you.